the Reverend Dr. Patrick Reyes, author, activist, father, spouse, strategist, runner, writer, and most importantly, we're going to get to this, star watcher.
That's right.
Star is probably not the right thing. Constellation watcher.
Constellations. That's right.
You gotta, so just to give you all a little bit of a preview, a little foretaste of Glories Divine, we're going to get to this. He is, and I'm just happy to call you friend. He is with the Forum for Theological Exploration, among other many things. And we're going to post his bio. He has his PhD from Claremont, his bachelor's from California State University, Sacramento. What was your bachelor's in?
History, social movements. So,
history too, man. Golly, I need to take a survey of my guests because there's been a lot of history majors. An MDiv from Boston U, and there's a master's and the PhD from Claremont. What was your master's at Claremont?
It was just an MA in theology.
Okay, just an MA. Okay, getting ready to work. Just thanks for being here. He's calling in from home in Atlanta, sheltering, vaccinated, I hope.
That's right. Yep, absolutely. Well, 2 miles from the CDC. I hope that they take care of us in Decatur here.
Yes, just free everybody. Just in a little advertisement. Get vaccinated. We need everybody vaccinated. Thanks for being here, and we're going to jump into it really quickly and start with, I think, where start, and it's kind of where the book in a way starts, in terms of vocation and call, but in some new ways. But I like to ask it the way Howard Thurman asked it, is what is it, Patrick, that is making you come alive? Because what the world needs are people who are coming alive. What is making you come alive these days?
Yeah, I mean, you stirred it. Carmelita, my daughter, part of when we're talking about just generational shifts, one of the ways I've been introducing myself recently has been, I'm sitting between generations of Carmelitas. I was doing some of that genealogical stuff. I had a dream. Yeah, I go back, I find a Carmelita. My grandma's name was Carmelita. I have a daughter named Carmelita, and I imagine there'll be in 4 or 5 generations a Carmelita who carries our spirit. So I have just been enlivened by that. The other thing I'll say, because this is, to make me human, I'm way too old to be taking up skateboarding. I just started doing it, and it's given me an excuse to learn from teenagers who both think it's hilarious I'm out there, and really they're disappointed that I can't be their mentor. Like, I roll up and they're like, "Oh, it's an old dude. He knows how to do this." And nope, I'm here to learn, friends. So it's been humbling, and it's just making me really excited to be with young people.
I love it. Like, you got to get your balance. You got to get. Now, you're wearing a helmet, right, Patrick?
I'm wearing a helmet, but they see me and they're like, "Hey, can you show me some tricks?" And I'm like, "Hey, can you teach me how to turn?" So, like, I can get home. It's really at that point right now.
So, what is the steepest incline? Are you?
Oh, it's my garage. It's barely okay. Anything. It's something I can still jump off the board and feel confident that I can walk that fast. So.
Oh, wow. I love that you keep learning. I love that you keep learning. Something I really appreciate you and you. It's in both books. The first book, folks, if you haven't seen it, Nobody Cries When We Die: God, Community, and Surviving to Adulthood, which in a way is worth reading before The Purpose Gap, because it gives some context, although you give lots of context in the current book. But one of the things I really appreciate you've expanded for me, Barbara Brown Taylor talks about in Altars of the World, this Christian practice of paying attention. Okay. I feel like you're my model for somebody who pays attention. And in ways, she has that image of being on the subway train and, with glasses and looking across the aisle and kind of imagining, but I don't think she actually engages the person, but I love the story in The Purpose Gap where you have convened this group of scholars in Yosemite National Forest, of all places, no Wi-Fi,
No Wi-Fi,
No
no
nothing.
electricity,
The electricity.
no heat, no hot water.
Oh, oh, wow. No hot water. And you, I mean, like, I guess you do, probably still, you got up to go for a run in the morning and you stop, see a couple who are staying in a cabin and you stop and you end up in a conversation with them. I mean, you're for an hour, even though you're convening this group of scholars, like, wow. And maybe it was the coffee cup that got
it was
you.
totally coffee. Let's be clear. There was no hot water. There's no electricity. They had coffee. They were park staff. You know, they're 20-something-year-olds that, like, the park was crowded. They had evacuated half the park when we were there. And they were the park staff that was left over, and they had their little camping stove, and they got their coffee going. And I was like, hey, you want to, I would love a cup of coffee if you're pouring stuff.
That's a good friend to have. That's biblical. He'll share a cup of water and a cup of coffee makes it even better.
That's right.
That is beautiful. I mean, but you just really, I feel like, paying attention, and that may be part of what sort of starts, empowering communities of color to find their meaning and thrive. Is it doesn't take much. I mean, you sort of model that in the book. I feel like how you pay attention to what you notice and how you engage others. But it starts with, once you start paying attention, you see the disadvantages. This is, I mean, over and over again, I feel like you say, like, the pulling up from your bootstraps, that doesn't work. I love the quote you have in there. I can't pull up my bootstraps if you've stole my laces and my boots.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
And what I've learned, Lee, is I think that's really interesting about that quote. I didn't know this when I was writing the book. So I talk about how stupid that is as a concept, like, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. When I found out what it actually is about, it's about, like, using your bootstraps to get over a fence. Like, you're supposed to do it. It's already ridiculous in the very beginning. Like, you can't literally do it. It's always meant that. So, like, the fact that we use that as something that people should do, it has never made sense.
Wow. Well, there you go. And it's time to revise and maybe take that out of our vocabulary. So I have to say this, friends, just reading the book, which the kudos are amazing. I love this. Janet Wolfe, I don't know her, with the nonviolent organizing part of Children's Defense Fund. She says, "I see your violence, and I will raise you hope and love." I feel like that's what this book is about. It sees the violence, it sees the disadvantage, and it raises you hope and love. I mean, the image I have actually is from your first book, where you go out for a run one morning in a farming sort of area, maybe near Salinas, where you grew up. And you look across to the horizon, sort of the sun is rising in the mist or something. I'm just remembering this in my mind. And you see some people working, and you recognize one of the workers as somebody you went to school with.
Yeah.
It almost chokes me up. It almost chokes me up to think about it. I mean, you're at that point, maybe in your PhD program or something like that, realizing, like, some tremendous, you've figured out some ways. People, it's not just you've had others who've helped you get over this gap, but he didn't, and that was a realization, right? I mean, am I describing
that's absolutely right? No, you're spot on. I mean, I think to give folks who don't know me, I'm from California, Salinas, California, agricultural, Chicano majority, Latino community. I'm Chicano. Really thinking through, we're an education desert. Like, folks don't leave. We stay where we are. There's no major university. Less than 1% have a graduate degree in anything. And so here I am, because of my grandma. You said making space and paying attention. My grandma made space and paid attention to how I might thrive. And one of the things that, going from the first book, Nobody Cries, to the second book, was really about, like, in the first book, I mean, it's essentially a coming of age, spiritual autobiography, memoir, kind of making sense of my theological training and trying to say God calls us to live, because so many of my friends didn't make it.
Right.
And this next book is really about, well, I don't want to be the exception to the rule.
Right.
I want to rewrite the rules so that way we can thrive.
Right. Not just survive, but thrive.
That's right.
I mean, and I think that's a beautiful thing. And it reminded me, very formative for me, was Sharon DeLo's Park's work around mentoring communities, not just mentors, but mentoring communities, and it's putting together those resources. And for you, that's not just people. And as a good Presbyterian, I noticed you thanked a lot of Presbyterians, but I also noticed, I think one of the proudest things that makes me a Presbyterian is a commitment to public education, public libraries, public parks. Those places have also been part of sort of the fertile soil, literally, that has helped form you. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, in this next book, I mean, in the Purpose Gap, I talk about the public libraries where my son's deaf in one ear and partially deaf in the other one, and that's where we go to get services. That's where in Everett, in Washington, where I was serving as assistant dean, that's where the majority, and similar to where I am in Decatur, it's with the majority of the folks who are experiencing homelessness would spend their days. And my kids know everyone on our block by name, and that's only because of public services like the public libraries and public parks. I mean, I say, in the Purpose Gap, I mean, thank God for my dad that he took us to them.
He took you to Yosemite Park.
He opened up my imagination. Like part of these spaces, these public spaces can give us a sense of belonging and community that is bigger than ourselves and bigger than our own community. And we don't stop and appreciate those, I feel like, enough. I mean, we're starting to do it in the pandemic as people get outside and spend a little bit more time outside. But I do think that these public spaces, I mean, it's one of the greatest goods that, no one person can own people do own beaches, but they can't own the beaches that I went to growing up. Part of this is about sharing the collective good for the common good.
100%. Yeah, I love the story. And yes, it cost you the gas and the time, away to get to that public park, the food that you would buy, and the $15 tent fee. I mean, this is not a $100 or $200, hotel fee. I mean, and you could really, I love that I had this kind of image of you as a kid. I don't know how old you were when when that happened, that you kind of laid back and looked up at the night sky, so it's not the sun, the one star, right? It's this constellation that you saw in you're not in the city anymore, right? Kind of context. And that you say that's like the most memorable moment of your life or something like that, which is.
It is. I mean, part of the, one of the themes in the book is that I have a commitment to, not picking out stars, the exceptions to the rules. It really is about how do we look at constellations and take inventory? How do we celebrate the folks that we have in our communities that are doing good work? And I remember when I took there were deans, presidents, and scholars to Yosemite. And the day before they all got there, I went for a run. Now, granted, there was a fire going on, and all kinds of craziness was happening in California at the time. And I go for a run, and I get behind this really large boulder. And, I call my dad. I said, "Dad, can I FaceTime you?" Which is the cool thing about technology right now, that we can do this. And I go, is this where you would take us when we were little? And he goes, "Oh yeah, I remember that." Like all the sights and smells all came back. And it was one of those experiences that, he could give us that was not, a trip to Europe. Like I'm learning about my colleagues when I went to, college and seminary experience, like these extravagant pieces. It was really him just taking us up for a 3.5-hour drive, and me just thinking like, wow, this is amazing that I have access to these stars, to be able to look up the night sky with no light pollution. I mean, it's incredible.
Right. And did y'all have a rhythm of going to the library also? I mean, at that point, it may have been Wi-Fi access. You're a lot younger than me, but
yeah.
Now,
we had great libraries. Sister Chavez Library was one of my favorite places in Salinas. Our school library, went to John Steinbeck Elementary School, from Salinas, get a little elementary school, our local library, librarian.
And he was from Salinas, Salinas too.
That's right. And, our librarian there I would check out books, and she would take my hats because we weren't supposed to wear them inside. So we had a nice little exchange of public goods, usual stuff.
Right. Beautiful. I just want to welcome a couple of folks, Mike Ferguson, Mark Peak, who's a California guy who's said his father-in-law took up surfing and skateboarding at 60.
That's right. Mark, I need some lessons then.
You're ahead of the game, man. You're ahead of the game. So I think that's a beautiful thing. I started to say this a minute ago. One of my favorite parts of this book are like the first, like, I guess it's maybe, I feel like it's 10 pages. It's not that long, y'all, but it's the acknowledgments. The way you acknowledge, starting with your family and starting with an apology, like you felt like you didn't show up places. I mean, it really touched me. And then you talk about your cousins, your grandma Carmen. You talk about your colleagues who inspire you. The courage that you see in them. It's just a beautiful thing. Your freedom fighters. There's a whole list. This thing about with Dale Andrews. I mean, who came to your life just as a seminary student, pissed off about the distance that you were from your community and curriculum, and took you across the river to a picket line. And I can hear his voice saying this too, a booming voice: the people united will never be defeated. I mean, you're starting to shape in this acknowledgement page, the constellation. This is your constellation. Am I right?
Absolutely. I say I get to work with a lot of scholars of color. It's one of the things that's in my portfolio at FT. I absolutely adore it. And I always say, write the acknowledgments first, because none of us get here without the people around us. And I think of when I was writing this purpose gap, which was all about, community. How do we build communities of support, and so that way future generations can thrive? And this is only possible because of the folks in my life. And that apology I offer, just for folks who are curious about it, is really about when we sacrifice everything for our vocation and call. In the U.S., I just feel like we've been taught a sense of purpose means I got to find my thing. Like I'm the only thing that matters. Everyone else, I'm sacrificing. Everyone else has got to point in that direction. And I was doing that. I was on that wheel trying to make a difference in my community, experience my call. And, I missed my uncle's funeral. My uncle was with me every single step of the way, my whole entire life. One of my biggest supporters. He died too early, and I literally missed his funeral because I was pursuing what I thought was my vocation and call. And what a backwards way to think about vocation and call, if not to be with those that you love most throughout your life. And I just felt like this is one of those moments that I really need to take a better inventory of what does it mean to live into vocation, to purpose, and to find meaning. It's with our people.
Amen. And that's something anybody can do.
That's right.
But particularly for communities of color, I think it's really helpful. I mean, there's been a lot, thanks to the Lilly Endowment, among others, about call, thanks to FTE and others, discerning vocation has become a very important question for Presbyterians. I mean, it's in our baptismal vows. I mean, I literally wrote about it for my D-Min thesis. It's something I really matter about. What you say is, that's good and nice. You can do anything. You can say that to a white guy, but not necessarily the same would be true, or definitely not the same would be true for many communities and persons of color, especially. And so describe that gap. There's a gap. You have images of this from sort of where you are to where God is calling you, this opportunity place. There's this that you can't really navigate on your own, right? I mean, so you describe some of the violence and some of the disadvantage. Maybe you want to say something about that.
Yeah, I mean, I try to take inventory. I was taking that phrase. What do you want to be? You can be anything you want when you grow up. Like this kind of like thing we tell our kids all the time. And why for kids of color, kids out of my community, that's just not true. Like it's statistically not true. It's not a factual thing you can tell folks. And the things that I was wrestling with is I knew that growing up. Like kids know that, when you don't see adults going off and being scientists and rocket scientists, when you don't see them living.
There's a few stars. There's a few little stars here and there.
They are. And if you're in a community like the one I grew up in, they're not around. There's a Bloomberg has a brain concentration index. People are extracted out of your community and lifted and put into communities, major metros, communities with high wealth, high opportunity, and that's just one person. And that's not the rules that we live by. That's not changing the conditions that many of us face. And so I was trying to take inventory of this when I say my son. My wife is Jewish, Jewish and Native American, Mescalero Apache, for her mom. And so when I say this to my kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? We have to keep the Shoah in mind. We have to keep the genocide against First Nations, indigenous people on these lands. That's a reality. The violence experiencing on the border. When my son says, I write this in the book, asked me, do I have to hide being Latino? Because he's in the South, he's seeing what's happening on the thing. He sees how his neighbors are talking about us at the border, and he's worried for his life. I mean, his ability to imagine a future has been impacted.
Right.
And he has opportunities, absolutely, more than I had, and definitely more than my dad had and my grandparents had. But at the same time, that impact on the imagination, I wanted to start there. We have a different starting place. That's not to say that other literature isn't great. It's absolutely great, but we do have a different starting place.
Right. Yeah. So the book is about, and I love you make this promise that by the end of the book, you'll understand how to close this purpose gap, folks. That's worth the read. I've not finished. I'm almost there. But I do think it is, it seems to be about identifying these constellations as one of the keys here, and helping others identify theirs, or being part of a constellation. And that actually feels empowering. Like, it's not just up to me, but it's up to us. I mean, this is good ecclesiological work, it seems like.
Oh, Lee, I mean, I don't know. I'm guessing your audience is similar to mine, which is pastors and scholars.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that we are the most egotistical, but we tend to want to seek the pulpit. When is it my turn to pray, or
preach, man? Come on, bring it.
And part of this has been a culture shift around, like, how do we really take serious that I am not supposed to be the star of this show?
Right.
Like, I am supposed to bring my people along. I'm supposed to have a broader array. That changes how I live. That changes how I eat. That changes how I set the table. I mean, it really is a different way of being. And it's hard because there are folks, even that I work with, who are some of the most liberative people, who just can't let that sort of, it's my turn to be in charge. Why can't I be the big cheese today? And that's a really, really hard thing to let go of, to say we're trying to do something different and design a different way to be together. And for me, that's great. And for me, I also feel like, as a Latino, as a Chicano, from what my grandma taught me, that's in our blood. That's how we have been. That's how she gathered us at the table. She didn't say, everyone's in my house, these are my rules. She said, as you cross over a threshold, I'm glad you're here, mijo. If you came to our house, Lee, she'd be like, Lee, I'm really glad you're here. Can I make you something to eat? Sit down and start talking to my aunts and uncles. And I mean, it really was a place where community thrived. And I think if we could get back to that in our sort of work, as scholars, as religious folks, as people who are leading the moral voice of this country, we could be restoring humanity. I mean, it's just love. I love it.
Right. It's true. It's not just about, for me, thriving. It's about you, we thriving. You tell a story. Gosh, I wish I could meet your grandmother. You tell the story. I think your cousin had passed away, and you're in her home, and she gives you his bed. But there's a holy conversation around that. I mean, it's just it's like having a meal, getting a bed at your grandmother's house.
That's right.
But she took it to the next level. What did she tell you about that bed?
Mijo, we're glad you're here. That bed doesn't belong to you. I mean, here's the thing about my grandma. She raised not just me, she raised my dad's whole generation, and he's one of a bunch. Let me just say, it's a lot of people, with all of his cousins and all that stuff. And then our generation. And I was living there as a teen, and I was loving it. I was the only one in. Like, when I came in, it was just everyone else had dispersed, and he had come in, and she was very clear. And when he passed a couple of years ago, that just came rushing to my mind around, like, the survivor's guilt of that. Like, she, in that moment, told me that, hey, You may not be used to this, Patrick, because you haven't been around us that much, but like, that's not your room. That's not just your bed. That's for the whole family. And it was a really kind of grounding moment for me to realize what she was doing was bigger than me. I was thinking I'm special. Like, she loved me more than everyone else. If my cousins are listening, I think she did. I will pick them up on that. But I do think she was doing something really special, and that she loved a whole community. And if you went to her funeral, you go back to Bakersfield, and that's what people will tell you. Everyone felt special in her presence and loved. And that's what I'm trying to scale at FTE. That's what I'm trying to build in my family. So I'm trying to build in my local community here is if I can lift my grandma up so that you can meet her, Lee, that to me is a life well lived.
Man. Okay. Whew, now I feel like I'm meeting her. Hello, Carmen.
Carmen. Yep.
Carmel, that's biblical, isn't it? That's biblical.
Beauty. Yep.
Man, it is a beautiful God. Our time is going fast here. I want to thank Terry Ott also, who joined us, and others. We're glad you're here. If there are questions or comments you want me to put in here, there is so much, y'all, in this book. It would be great for a group to read. But what's wonderful, each section has, or actually within subsections, like great questions. Where would you go to see stars? What constellations exist in your life the world cannot see? What distractions do you have to turn off, to leave behind, to see the beauty available to you? I mean, there's some great questions. I guess good theological thinkers like you, ask really great questions. And there's really great ones here that you have to kind of sit with, run with, walk with. But they help, I feel like, Patrick, help us all to pay attention more. And I am more deeply your ally now than ever, and look forward to continuing doing this work with you, and grateful for your book. Folks, there's a website we're going to post in. I think it's just thepurposegap.com or .org.
Right.
.com. Please learn more about Patrick, learn more about the Forum for Theological Exploration as well. It's a wonderful resource, an innovation hub, incubator. It's a great place, and get engaged there. What else would you like for folks to know about Patrick before we wrap up?
You can check out if you want to go to see FT stuff, ftleaders.org. It's not just me, it's a whole team of doing crazy cool things. I acknowledge all of them in there, but yeah, it is a great organization. Our president, Stephen Lewis, my colleague, Christina Repley, are just leading all of this change in the entire community. So I'm deeply grateful for where I exist. It's a good place to work.
Well, I hope your work, you're the Nobody Cries When You Die was the Children's Defense Fund book club read in September 2019. I hope more book clubs, small and large, all across the country will pick up both of these books, engage with you, with FTE, and looking forward to crossing paths with you soon. I know you also have been involved with the Hispanic Theological Initiative. We didn't even get to talk about, you're on the board for ARC. Tell me what that means.
Art, Religion, Culture.
Art, Religion, Culture, great resource and organization. So get to know Patrick, and thank you, Patrick. Prayers for you, for who you are, what you represent, the way you guide us, lead us. I give thanks that you're part of my constellation of mentors to show me the way and open up new doors and insights. Your smile is really a place of joy for me. And prayers for Asher and Carmelita as well, and your wife. Now her name is escaping. Karen and Carrie, right?
Carrie.
Thanks so much. I wish you would bless us before we go, but let me invite folks to come back in 2 weeks. I'll have, I don't know if you know her, you probably do, a theological ethicist out at Claremont, Grace Cow. Is going to be with us to talk about, here in Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, I think is good, around Asian American theological ethics, which sadly enough is more needed now maybe than ever before. And she's a great person to help us frame those discussions. Hope you'll join us. Leading Theologically on the podcast. We love your reviews as well. But Patrick, could you send us away as we go?
I will. Before I do, Lee, what's the name of a beloved ancestor of yours?
A blood ancestor.
Beloved
Ancestor. Golly, there's so many, but I'll say today, the one who taught me to tie bow ties is my grandmother. Her name, I called her Nana. Her name was Sarah Lamar Everett.
Sarah Lamar Everett.
Mm-hmm.
All right. All right. As I send us off, as Nana Sarah Lamar Everett meets Carmelita, may you and I, Lee, join them as great ancestors, good ancestors, and meet our descendants as their ancestors, building a better world for love, justice, and peace in the world. And for all those listening, may you do the same.
Amen. Amen. Hallelujah. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Lee.
That's beautiful. Oh, that touched me right there. I can see it now.